Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 41 Part 1 Hunting Humans. Orcs were natural-born predators. Although their intelligence level was below that of humans, they were far superior at tracking and hunting weaker prey. And now that the barrier that used to exist between this world and the dungeon, was gone, the predators spilled out. Rower! Grr. The orcs used their feet to push aside the dead bodies of the boys who were obstructing their path and surveyed their surroundings. Sniff, sniff. Graw. The orcs had been holding their breath for an entire week as they sat in the darkness of the dungeon. No wonder they were so worked up by the smell of flesh and blood all around them. However, this group was just the reconnaissance team. As much as their blood boiled, they had tread carefully as, behind the circular portal, dozens of their kind awaited their report. Straight walls lined with many doors and windows. The leader of the reconnaissance team noted immediately how the building they were standing in had a complicated layout similar to a castle. Growling, the beast's nostrils flared. He had two choices. One was to immediately leave this hall to slaughter whatever prey they could get their hands on. The other was to kill all the humans within this castle, make it their fortress, then go forth and hunt. It was clear which was the safer choice. The leader barked at one of his subordinates. "Bring forth our brothers!" He then looked up at the ceiling. The beast's ears twitched as he listened for sounds from above. One floor up, then one more, and even beyond that. The building was filled with prey. His head throbbed from the voice echoing in his head, incessantly urging him to slaughter. "All right." He parted his lips and bared his fangs. "We'll start by clearing out the inside of this building." A crowd had gathered at Guangali Beach. Despite the gloomy clouds overhead, people's attentions were solely focused on one thing: the large gate that had appeared on the beach. The local police force and the Busan branch of the Hunters Association had cooperated to set up a barricade prohibiting civilians from entering the area. But the number of onlookers continued to grow anyway. "Boss!" The new employee whimpered to his supervisor, having almost been trampled by the throng. "Are we supposed to deal with this every time a gate appears?" But the supervisor was similarly taken aback by the situation. They had never seen it this busy around a gate. "We're just going to have to deal with it. It's because this is one of the biggest gates to ever appear in Busan." They then peeked over their shoulders at the immense hole suspended in midair. It felt like they might be sucked in if they stared at it, so they were doing their best to ignore it. Of course, a gate can't hurt anyone unless a dungeon break happens, though. Even so, they detested these things, kind of like how some people had an irrational fear of the ocean or outer space. That's why, whenever they were out in the field, the sole preoccupation of the pencil pushers was a fervent wish that the hunters would deal with the ominous holes. In that vein, there was one aspect of this specific raid that put them at ease. The same thought seemed to cross the rookie's mind. "Oh, boss, did you hear?" "Hear what?" "I heard an S-rank hunter from Seoul is on his way." Who hadn't heard about that? The supervisor estimated that about half the crowd was here to see the gate, and the other half was rubbernecking to see the S-rank hunter. "Hunter Jin Woo-sung?" "Yes, him. Do you know him or something? Why were you so excited?" "No." The rookie blushed and frantically waved his hands. "To tell you the truth, it's going to be my first time seeing an S-rank hunter, so..." The supervisor sighed, exasperated. "Hunter Sung is a newbie just like you, so why were you so different from him?" "Boss, if you've got the energy to chit-chat, why don't you make yourself useful and help out by putting in some overtime?" "I'm taking a break because my leg hurts from being on my feet all day." The supervisor clicked his tongue as the rookie's reproachful glances made it clear he felt wronged. Though his superior didn't think this new guy was particularly reliable, the rookie's enthusiasm was somewhat understandable. "I'll admit, I'm a little curious about Hunter Sung too. Everyone's talking about him. You too, huh, boss? I mean, he single-handedly defeated the boss of an S-rank gate." Technically, the Queen Ant was the magic beast boss of the dungeon on Jeju Island. However, the battle with the monstrous mutated ant had left such a strong impression, many of those who'd watched the live broadcast of that raid mistakenly took it for the boss. Killing the boss closes the gate, so in the people's eyes, Jin Woo was a hunter who could close an S-rank gate all by himself. No wonder there were rumors Jin Woo's power was up there with the national-level hunters. It was only natural that he was getting all this attention. To think, an S-rank hunter is coming. I wonder what it's like to see one in person. The supervisor was a little unnerved by the rookie's sparkling eyes. Did he apply to the association to stalk hunters or something? Oblivious to his superior's petulant gaze, the rookie's eyes kept on shining, and he continued enthusiastically. "Hey, boss! What now? I've heard it's super difficult to look an extremely powerful hunter in the eyes. Have you ever run into an S rank before?" The supervisor recalled his business trip to Gwangju. "I have." "Wow!" The elder man, who'd initially found this exchange bothersome, puffed up with pride at the newbie's odd response. "How was it, sir? Were you really scared? Man, tell me about it. I met Hunter Dongwook Ma of the Fame Guild last year while on official business. Excuse me, I just need to get by." "Yes, of course." The two association employees quickly parted to let a man pass between them, then stepped back into place. "Huh?" The supervisor looked back at the hooded figure who'd just passed them. "What's wrong, boss?" "Nothing. I just thought he looked familiar." "Huh? That's weird. I thought so too. Does he work for the association?" Hang on, where was I? You were saying about Hunter Ma from the Fame Guild? Oh, right. I had a chance to meet Hunter Ma in person, and he was such a huge guy that his shoulders were this wide. Whoa! Turns out, the supervisor and the trainee were birds of a feather. Hunter Sung. Jong-soo Park was so happy to see Jin Woo that he sounded nearly tearful in a way unbecoming of a man in his 30s. It reflected just how high the stakes of this raid were. Jin Woo calmly checked the time as Jong-soo greeted him overzealously, and watched as the numbers on his cell phone changed from 10:59 to 11 o'clock. Good, Jin Woo smiled. Although he'd taken a roundabout route using stealth in order to avoid the chaos, he'd still arrived on time. He was starting off the raid on a good note. He finally looked up and took in the sight of the gate. It's bigger than I thought. The gate was much larger in person than it had looked in the footage he'd seen. And just as the association had informed the Knights Guild, the amount of mana radiating from it was extraordinary. What kind of magic beasts am I going to find in there? Jin Woo couldn't help but grin. Beyond the gate's unusual size, nothing else about it seemed out of the ordinary. As one would expect at any raid, there were two groups of low-rank hunters standing by. That's the collection team, and that's the excavation team. The more knowledge one had, the more they noticed. And thanks to his time with the Hunters Guild, Jin Woo was easily able to tell the groups apart based on their uniforms and tools. And there are guild personnel busily running around as always. Indeed, experience was the best teacher. Whoa! He actually came! Mr. Jin Woo-sung? Having been called over by Jong-soo, the elite hunters began gathering around Jin Woo, their faces lighting up as soon as they recognized him. As he briefly greeted each hunter, Jinwoo sized them up. He counted 30 high-rank hunters. Just as Jiangsu had confidently explained, the quantity and quality of the Knights Guild A and B-rank hunters was on par with the Hunters Guild. Of course, he expected no less from a guild that represented an entire region of Korea. On top of that, because everyone was suited up in either armor or protective gear imbued with mana, the title of knight fit them perfectly. It was a shame such an outstanding guild was often underestimated simply due to a lack of S-rank members. Jinwoo understood why President Park had hastily asked him to join the Knights Guild. By the time Jinwoo snapped out of his thoughts, he was already surrounded by the other hunters. A moment of hesitation soon turned into a competition to get Jinwoo's attention.
Hunter-sung, the Jeju Island raid was truly amazing. How do you summon those soldiers in black? Or wait, are you sure they're actually minions? You're going to lead today's raid, aren't you?
Jinwoo didn't know how to handle the barrage of questions.
Okay, stop! Stop!
Healer Yerim, whose idea it had been to invite Jinwoo in the first place, pushed the other hunters aside and stepped forward.
You're making Hunter-sung uncomfortable. Stop acting like a bunch of newbies.
She glared sharply at her colleagues. High-rank healers were just like den mothers, who carried the weight of the team's well-being. The strike squad members bit their tongues and swallowed their complaints like children after a scolding. Heh, Yerim chuckled. She spun and extended her hand to Jinwoo.
I'm Yerim Young, the main healer of the elite strike squad of the Knights Guild.
She grinned at him as she continued.
At the very least, I think the leader and the primary healer of the team should get along, don't you?
Jinwoo's gaze shifted away from Yerim, whose eyes were gleaming with an ulterior motive, and to Jiangsu.
Haven't you explained everything to them yet? Oh, the thing is...
Jiangsu ran his fingers through his hair, embarrassed.
My schedule's been crazy. What with all the paperwork and gathering everyone here.
He gave an awkward laugh, then looked around at the other hunters. At least everyone in the squad was assembled in front of him, so he would have to explain things only once.
I, Jiangsu Park, will be the leader of this raid.
His words triggered some grumbling in the crowd.
The president again? But Hunter-sung is here. Is this really okay?
The tank Jiangsu was among the strongest A-rank hunters, so it wasn't strange for him to lead a raid. In fact, except when he was under the weather, he led most of the Knights Guild raids. However, there was now an S-rank hunter in the strike squad. Common sense dictated that the strongest would take the lead. Jiangsu quickly continued his explanation for his confused subordinates.
Hunter Jinwoo-sung will be in charge of our safety and guard our rear.
This had been Jiangsu's demand, that Jinwoo ensure the squad's safety from the back of the party. This was for both the security and honor of the Knights Guild. Hunters with high combat abilities usually marched in front. Those weaker and more vulnerable to sudden attacks, such as mages, healers, or support hunters, brought up the rear. Since the Knights Guild was having difficulties recruiting rookies, the survival of these hunters was a matter of the guild's continued existence. So what if they placed Jinwoo in back? The strike squad could quickly advance without worrying about a surprise attack from behind. No, they would even welcome it because the one fielding such strikes would be him, Jinwoo-sung, destroyer of thousands of S-rank magic beasts on Jeju Island. Heck, if their enemies persistently attacked from the rear, the strike squad might even be able to clock out early. That was the first reason for Jiangsu's request. The second was more pressing. Gulp. Jiangsu swallowed hard as he observed the swarm of reporters by the police barricade. It was proof that this raid was the center of attention. If they weren't careful, people might think the Knights Guild was riding on Jinwoo's coattails. I mean, it's true, but either way, he couldn't have the public thinking that, because the true purpose of this raid was to show people that the Knights Guild was still going strong. That's why he had been so desperate to recruit Jin Woo.
And so, this is something Hunter Sung and I agreed on after much discussion, so I will only entertain your complaints after the raid is done,
Jiangsu relayed to his teammates. But at that moment,
hang on, sir. I, for one, don't understand this decision.
An A-rank hunter stepped forward. He was a rookie who had been recently recruited to the guild.
Are we so weak that we need someone else's protection?
Blood drained from the faces of the senior hunters at his question. Gah. Hey, kid. Confidence oozed from the young hunter, who looked to be about Jinwoo's age.
Is that not so, everyone?
His attitude was understandable. He was the ace of the new crop of hunters this year, and given that the accolades he received had been second only to those of Chul Kim, his bravado wasn't unfounded. The only problem was that he was barking up the wrong tree.
Mr. Jin Woo Sung, do the elite members of the Knights Guild seem that weak to you?
Jin Woo suppressed his laughter and quietly listened to what the new kid had to say. Of course, the other hunters were on pins and needles. Where is his unwarranted confidence coming from? Oh man, is this his first time meeting an S-rank hunter? Somebody, please stop him. He should know this isn't the time or place for spouting such nonsense. Seeing his seniors at a loss for words and Jinwoo's silence made the rookie even cockier.
And you too, President Park. Me?
Was it Jiangsu's turn now? The guild master was speechless as he pointed to himself.
I know S ranks have an extremely high net worth, but why would you agree to give him half the profits? He's just one person, not an entire guild.
Jiangsu looked to Jin Woo for help as his head started throbbing. Hunter Sung, I leave him in your hands. Jin Woo gave a firm nod.
In any case, I don't understand the ridiculous terms of this contract.
Just then, Igris materialized in front of the protesting rookie. Eek! The A-rank hunter flinched and stumbled back at the force of the magic power coming from the knight in black armor. But before he could retreat more than 2 steps, his back collided against something hard. Startled, the newbie turned to see a second knight a few heads taller than the first peering down at him. Iron.
Yikes!
He gasped and broke out in a cold sweat. Something next to him tapped his shoulder, and his head slowly swiveled to see a hooded figure in a black robe.
Aeon!
The rookie's legs gave out at the dark mana emanating from Fan. I feel bad enough for him, so I'll hold off on summoning Baru. The 3 knight-rank soldiers returned to the shadows with a wave from Jin Woo. He then walked over to the trembling man and offered a hand.
Do you understand now?
The A-rank rookie grabbed Jinwoo's hand and clumsily got back on his feet. He nodded vigorously. And that was that. Jin Woo and the Knights Guild strike squad moved to the front of the gate, but before they went in,
just a minute, please.
President Jiangsu Park and Vice President Yu Tae-young performed a final check on their equipment and team members. Standing in front of the gate, their excitement tamped down, and there was only silence. He wasn't sure since when, but Jin Woo had grown to like the palpable tension right before entering a dungeon. It felt like his mind was settling. In the past, Jin Woo had lived in fear of receiving a summons from the association and had avoided all phone calls. Who would have thought it'd ever be possible that he could feel this way?
We're good to go, boss. All right.
Jiangsu nodded and walked over to Jin Woo, who was keeping his distance from the strike squad. They exchanged looks.
Hunter Sung. Yes.
Jin Woo uncrossed his arms and met the guild master's gaze. Jiangsu bowed his head to Jin Woo.
I look forward to working with you.
It was a short sentence that conveyed many sentiments. Jinwoo replied in kind.
I look forward to working with you as well.
Jongsu and Yutae entered the gate first, followed by the rest of the party. After confirming that the rest of the party was in, Jinwoo strolled through. You have entered the dungeon. As usual, the system message visible only to Jinwoo greeted him. However, Jinwoo blinked in surprise. The dungeon was made of passages big enough to accommodate lumbering giants. Although his experience in high-ranked dungeons was limited, he'd luckily been able to explore one before. Based on that encounter, what puzzled Jinwoo wasn't the magnitude of this dungeon, but rather its atmosphere. What's going on? For some reason, Jinwoo was at ease here. He felt an ominous wind blowing in many a dungeon, but this was his first time feeling comfortable in one. Just then,
it's an ogre.
Contrary to Jinwoo's senses, the strike squad ran into danger right from the start.
A two-headed ogre. Everyone, watch out!
A magic beast that could easily be the boss of a high-ranked dungeon guarded the entrance, its red eyes flashing.
Grah!
Two-headed ogres were more than twice the size of ordinary ogres and possessed Herculean strength. The average strike squad would flee in terror upon encountering one.
Let's go!
The elite hunters of the Knights Guild leaped into action. Jongsu the tank rushed to the front of the group with his shield raised. As soon as the ogre spotted him, it swung a club that seemed to be fashioned from a tree it had uprooted. Bam! The powerful impact shook the entire cave, but Jongsu, who had bulked up his muscles using a skill, braced his knees and withstood the strike.
Boss! I'm fine. Then I'm going in too.
Yutae, the sub-tank, took a firm stance next to Jongsu. Having succeeded in getting the ogre's attention, Jongsu roared,
Attack!
At his signal, the Knights Guild's counterattack began. Arrows, spells, swords, and spears rained down on the two-headed ogre. Grek! The enraged monster went berserk, but Jongsu wouldn't allow it to focus on anyone but the main tank, and Yutae moved quickly to block the occasional rogue attacks. Stomp! Yutae slid backward, his feet leaving two long skid marks on the ground as he blocked a kick. Thanks to him, the other hunters sustained little to no damage.
Gah!
Little by little, the damage dealers tore into the ogre's body with exceptional teamwork. It was clear to Jinwoo why the Knights Guild had held on to the #1 spot in the Yeongnam region for so long.
Group!
Eventually, the ogre began foaming at the mouth and toppled over backward. Thud! The boss-level magic beast had gone down without injuring any of the humans. It was a flawless victory for the team.
Nice!
Jongsu pumped both his fists. Was it because they had a guest? Both he and his team were in the highest of spirits today. Jongsu wondered what Jinwoo thought of their performance. It would be the cherry on top if our teamwork impressed him enough to join our guild. Jongsu glanced at Jinwoo and locked eyes with him. The tank felt awkward, as if the S-rank hunter had read his mind, but after much internal debate, he eventually smiled and walked over.
We'll continue after regrouping. Got it.
Jinwoo nodded in understanding. He could freely replenish his mana and recover stamina using potions, but other hunters didn't have that luxury. They needed a moment's rest after fighting such a strong magic beast. Jongsu gazed at the ogre with a troubled look.
This isn't good.
Jinwoo turned to face him.
This raid won't be as easy as I expected. I can't believe we had to deal with a two-headed ogre right at the entrance.
Jongsu rubbed his chin, then grinned at Jinwoo.
By any chance, do you know the nickname for these things?
Jinwoo shook his head, and Jongsu immediately answered.
Gravekeepers.
Was it because of all the inevitable victims, who had fallen in the face of their immense power? But Jiangsu's explanation diverged greatly from Jinwu's expectations.
It's because
He gazed into the depths of the cave. To him, it felt like ominous energy was wafting out from the bowels of the dungeon.
if you come across a two-headed ogre at the entrance as opposed to the boss lair,
His voice sounded worried.
it means the dungeon is filled with the undead.
The emergency center of the Hunters Association received an urgent phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to a teenage girl.
Is this the association?
The staffer at the call center could tell by the sobs coming through the line that something was very wrong.
Yes, it is. Please state your emergency. I'm at my school. There are magic beasts outside. Outside? Where are you right now? I'm hiding. I was with my friend, but my friend was... Hick. I'm in the bathroom.
It was difficult to understand the girl because of her uncontrollable sobbing, but the experienced employee was fortunately able to piece her words together to figure out what she was trying to say. An alert was immediately sent to the main office of the Hunters Association. Magic beast sighting at school. One victim confirmed. Caller in hiding. Could there have been a dungeon break inside a school? The staffer shuddered at the grisly thought and focused on rescuing the girl.
How many magic beasts are there? Are they nearby? I don't know. Oh, the screams. There are too many screams. Hick. Am I going to die? Please stay calm and listen to me.
The call taker had been doing this job for a long time and knew all too well how vulnerable humans could be when their lives were in danger. In situations like this, it was imperative to remain calm. The primary objective was to steady the caller and relay instructions as needed. That was what it meant to work at an emergency call center.
Hunters from the association are on their way now. They will do their utmost to save you, so you must keep calm until they get there. Do you understand? Really? Then, I'm not going to die?
The voice coming through the receiver began to sound less panicked. This was a good sign. With the student in a stabler frame of mind, the staffer proceeded to ask the most important question necessary to ensure her survival.
By any chance, do you know what kind of magic beasts they are? Yes, I know. On TV, I saw them. What kind of magic beasts are they?
If they had dull senses and relied solely on their eyes, then hiding in a bathroom was a good idea. The one taking the call prayed that's what they were dealing with.
Their body looks like a human's, but they have ugly faces. Oh, they have green skin.
Could it be? The staffer's eyes widened.
Are you talking about orcs? Yes, that was the name. Orcs?
No. The staffer immediately jumped up and shouted,
Get out of there! Right now! Orcs are.
Despite the desperate prayers that had been offered, the loud crack of the bathroom door being ripped open could be heard over the line, followed by a blood-curdling scream.
Guy!
The Knights Guild's raid was going smoothly. In fact, it was rather odd how well it was going. Yet another magic beast.
Arg!
A rotting creature the size of a house evaded the strike squad's attacks instead of retaliating before being captured by a mage hunter's restraining magic and meeting a miserable end. This same series of events kept recurring, so the hunters began to wonder.
Isn't this weird? Why do they keep running away from us? It's like they're being chased by something, don't you think?
The hunters kept encountering powerful undead magic beasts such as vampires, liches, dread worms, and red ghouls. The undead weren't easy opponents to deal with. Killing them was hard enough, but hunters couldn't let down their guards even after the fact because the beasts could recover or come back to life and try to even the score at any moment. However, these particular enemies seemed to be offering up their lives to the hunters before they could use much of their power. They seemed so scared of something that they can't even consider resisting. That was Jiangsu's evaluation of the magic beasts they'd encountered thus far. The thought that he wouldn't have brought Jinwu along had he known their opponents would be at this level popped into his head. You really don't know what to expect in a dungeon. Who knew raiding a top A-rank dungeon would be this easy? Well, anyway, it looked like they could safely complete the raid without any major injuries, which was a relief. It was a satisfying conclusion, despite suffering some financial losses. On the other hand, Jinwu was rather disappointed. I had high hopes for this A-rank dungeon, but although he could sense high levels of mana farther inside, he couldn't expect to gain much by way of experience points if this kept up. Jinwu hadn't even had a chance to join the battle because the Knights Guild was doing so well on their own. Jinwu quietly let out a sigh, then stopped dead in his tracks. Huh? He looked over his shoulder. Healer Yerem stopped next to him.
What's wrong, Hunter Son? Is there something behind us?
Jinwu didn't answer. His heart was pumping so furiously that he couldn't be bothered. Is this? His gaze, focused beyond the gate, seemed apprehensive. Yerem finally realized something wasn't right.
Hunter Sung?
Jinwu's expression darkened.
Arf! Ai!
Anguished screams echoed throughout the school. Less than half the student body had successfully escaped the building. Those remaining were either already corpses lying on the ground or running for their lives from the orcs. However, their efforts were futile. The orcs had begun their hunt from the bottom floor and gradually moved upward, killing everyone in sight.
Ah!
The trapped students hid in their classrooms and covered their ears to block out the screams coming from below. The 12th grade classrooms were on the top floor of the school. Jaina was among those who hadn't had a chance to escape. The only thing standing between the orcs and the students were the doors they'd barricaded with whatever they'd had on hand.
Oh, crap!
The boys gripped chairs and a mop with trembling hands, but none of them was reliable. Their only chance of survival would be if the hunters found them before the orcs did. Blam! The dented door was blown out of its frame.
Ah! Gaia!
Students screamed in terrified wails as two orcs drenched in the blood of countless victims entered the classroom.
AR!
A boy guarding the entrance threw away his mop and bolted toward the back door, but an orc lying in wait on the other side lodged an axe in his forehead. Crunk! The boy tumbled to the floor, his eyes lifeless.
AIE! Arg!
Both exits were blocked by orcs. The rest of the screaming students pressed themselves up against the windows, fully aware that jumping from the 6th floor windows or getting captured by the orcs would have the same end result. Jinwu. Jinwu. Jaina huddled with her classmates, who were trying to make themselves as small as possible in a corner of the room. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to manifest her brother, an S-rank hunter. She felt like Jinwu would come for her if only she called out to him. He was her last hope.
Grr! GRRK?
The orcs herding the students suddenly froze and growled to each other.
Sir, I sense a human with magic power. Kill it first.
Unlike ordinary humans, those who could wield magic power were a threat, so it was imperative to deal with them first. The orc that received the captain's command scanned the group and found Jaina.
Ah!
It grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her to the middle of the classroom.
Is it this one? Yes, Captain.
The underling was right. A tiny hint of magic power could be sensed on this girl. It didn't matter if it was her own power or emanating from a weapon she carried. The fact remained that this female human needed to be the first to die. The captain lifted his axe.
Aeon!
Jaina watched the weapon rise above her head and shut her eyes tightly.
Growling,
the captain took a few deep breaths and swung his axe down with a callous expression on his face. Shying, Jin Woo. At that moment, the black smoke rose from Jaina's shadow and instantly solidified into shape. Tak, the captain of the reconnaissance team, was flabbergasted as he realized a high orc in black armor had suddenly grabbed his wrist.
GRRK?
Even before the beast could say anything, the high orc slammed its fist on the captain's head, crushing it like a watermelon. Crack! The mouths of the students watching the scene gaped, and their brains struggled to make sense of what was happening. They turned away as one of their classmates was about to be brutally murdered when soldiers clad in black armor appeared out of thin air. Soldiers? Could they even be called soldiers? These creatures resembled the orcs, but somehow seemed even more orc-like than their victims. They also had red skin and were much larger. Next to them, the invading monsters were like kids who hadn't hit their growth spurt. The students' reactions were understandable. The soldiers Jin Woo had hidden in Jaina's shadow used to be high orc bodyguards assigned to protect Fang, the shaman boss of a high-ranked dungeon. Even among high orcs, they were the cream of the crop. Regular orcs versus great high orc warriors. The victor was already decided. One of the high orcs slammed its fist down as if to demonstrate the extreme power gap. Pow! An orc's head cracked open with that single blow, and its body flopped to the floor of the classroom. The students were horrified. Whoa! The monstrous beast that had endangered their lives had just been crushed by an even more monstrous beast. The high schoolers shut down at the overwhelming shock and fear they were experiencing. That is, all but one. Tears welled in Jaina's eyes because she knew what that black armor meant. Jin Woo is Jin Woo. Jaina could sense her brother's presence from the three high orcs that had formed a circle around her, as if trying to protect her.
KRRR.
The high orc behind Jaina didn't even have to move an inch. The two remaining invaders attempted to run away, but the high orc that had crushed the head of the captain grabbed them by the backs of their necks.
Growling, Grah!
The dangling orcs flailed desperately to escape, but they stopped resisting as soon as their heads were bashed together. Bam! Their foreheads burst, and soon two corpses hit the floor. Thud. Thud. The three orcs assaulting the classroom were dispatched in the blink of an eye. It was over. The high orc stood in place, silently guarding Jaina. How many seconds had passed? The other students gradually calmed their racing hearts and exchanged glances. What the? Did those monsters save us? Are they protecting us? The one thing that was clear was that the black-armored orcs weren't going to harm them.
What about my brother? Where is he?
Jaina asked, sniffling, but the high orcs didn't answer.
Jin Woo?
Instead, they stopped Jaina from leaving their side. When she cautiously peered up at one of them, the high orc shook its head. Jaina's safety was their top priority. They couldn't let her wander around a building infested with enemies. And sure enough, the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs echoed outside the classroom. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The high orc soldiers drew the weapons attached to their waists. While the footsteps had the nervous students holding their collective breath, many couldn't help but feel a little anticipation at the sight of the high orcs calmly preparing for battle. The kids finally had a fighting chance, and were relieved to have such reliable allies on their side. However, some were also sobbing out of terror, anxiety, worry, and grief.
NGH. Hick.
They hugged their crying friends tightly, and held their breath. The footsteps grew closer. Stomp, stomp, stomp. All the orcs scattered throughout the school had heard the cries of their brothers and were now gathered in front of the 12th grade classroom.